The wind in Montana Territory tasted like snow. It always did, long before the first flakes started to fall. Sarah Calloway could feel it in her bones, a deep, familiar ache as she stood on the edge of her property. The sky was turning the color of an old bruise, dark and heavy over the rolling brown hills. Her sheep, little white dots in the distance, were huddled together. They knew what was coming. Sarah pulled her woolen shawl tighter and let out a sharp whistle. "Blue, get him in!" Her border collie was a black and white blur, streaking across the pasture, nipping at the heels of the stragglers. Sarah moved with the grim efficiency of someone who had learned survival the hard way. The barn door was open, a dark mouth promising shelter. They were almost there when the first snowflake landed on her cheek. It was big, wet, and heavy, the kind of snow that didn't mess around. And that's when she saw it, a gray shadow moving at the edge of the tree line. Sarah froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. A wolf, lean, hungry, and bold. Early March was a cruel month. Winter had stripped the land bare, and spring was still just a rumor. Predators got desperate. She reached slowly, deliberately, for the rifle slung across her back. The wolf's yellow eyes watched her every move. It was only 20 yards away. Her sheep bleated in terror, a wave of panic pushing them against the barn door. Blue let out a low growl, the fur on his back standing up like wire. But he stayed right by her side, trained, loyal. "Easy, boy," she whispered, her voice a ghost on the wind. She brought the rifle to her shoulder, the cold metal a familiar weight against her cheek. The wolf tensed, its muscles bunching like coiled springs. Her finger slid to the trigger, but before she could squeeze, a gunshot cracked through the air. It wasn't her shot. The wolf yelped, a high, thin sound of pain, and twisted, disappearing back into the trees like a bad dream. Sarah whirled around, rifle still raised, her heart hammering against her ribs. A rider was coming from the east, moving at a steady trot through the now thickening snow. A stranger. And in this part of the country, a stranger was just a threat you hadn't identified yet. She kept the rifle trained on him as he approached, stopping a respectful distance away. He was a dark shape against the swirling white, his hat pulled low. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice calm and steady. He tipped his hat. "Saw you had some trouble." Sarah didn't lower her weapon, not by an inch. "I had it handled." The man nodded, his face still in shadow. "Looked that way. Didn't mean to interfere." He paused, his gaze sweeping the tree line. But wolves rarely hunt alone this time of year. It was like he summoned it with his words. Another wolf, bigger than the first, exploded from the trees. It wasn't slinking. It wasn't cautious. It was coming straight for her, a gray missile of teeth and fury. Sarah pivoted, her boots slipping on the fresh, slick snow. The world tilted. Her rifle went off, the shot burying itself in the ground as she fell. The wolf lunged. She saw a flash of yellow eyes, a glimpse of white teeth. This was it. Then another shot rang out, deafeningly close. The wolf dropped in midair, landing in a heap of fur and rage just feet from where she lay. It twitched once, then was still. Sarah scrambled to her feet, her whole body trembling. The stranger was off his horse in one fluid motion, his pistol still drawn as he approached the fallen animal. He nudged it with his boot, then holstered his weapon. "Dead," he confirmed. She finally lowered her rifle, the barrel feeling impossibly heavy. The snow was coming down hard now, a thick, white curtain that was quickly erasing the world. "Thank you," she said, the words stiff and foreign in her mouth. "But you should be on your way. Storm's coming." The man looked up at the sky, then back at her. "Yes, ma'am. Looks to be a bad one." He took a step toward his horse, then stopped. He grabbed his side, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. And that's when Sarah saw it, a dark stain spreading across his thick coat. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's nothing," he grunted, but his voice was tight. "Wolf must have had a friend I didn't see." He tried to take another step and stumbled hard, catching himself on his horse's flank. "Damn!" Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to keep her distance, to protect her home, her solitude. But the sky was almost black. The temperature was dropping like a stone. No one, not even a man who could shoot like that, survived a Montana blizzard without shelter. She looked at the man, his face now pale beneath his beard, and then at the dark, promising mouth of her barn. "I can't leave you out here," she said, the words feeling like a betrayal of her own hard-won caution. "Barn's this way. Can you walk?" He nodded, leaning heavily on his horse. "Daniel Hayes," he offered, his voice strained. "Sarah Calloway," she replied, not looking back at him. She was already moving toward the barn, her mind racing. "Don't make me regret this, Mr. Hayes." The barn was a fortress against the storm. It was built by her father, and his hands had built it to last. Sarah guided the stranger to a pile of clean hay in a corner, her mind still reeling. She was a woman who lived by a simple set of rules, and the first rule was, trust no one, especially not a man with a gun who appeared out of nowhere. But he'd saved her life. Twice. That had to count for something. Didn't it? She worked on autopilot, securing her panicked sheep in their pen, lighting the lanterns that cast a warm, flickering glow against the rough-hewn walls. The storm outside was a raging beast, its howls muffled by the solid wood. When she finally turned back to him, Daniel Hayes had taken off his heavy coat. His shirt underneath was torn, a bloody mess just below his ribs. "Let me see," she commanded, her voice sharper than she intended. She set a lantern down beside him, the light illuminating the wound. "It's not deep," he said, but he lifted the fabric to let her look. Sarah examined it with a detached clinical eye. Her father had been a doctor, and he'd taught her more than just how to stitch a hem. It was a clean slice, about 4 inches long, painful but not life-threatening, not if it was treated properly. "Wolf caught you with a claw, not teeth," she observed. "That's fortunate. I've had worse." "I don't doubt it." She stood up, her decision made. "I need to get supplies from the cabin. Don't move." The short walk to her cabin was a battle. The wind tore at her shawl, and the snow was so thick she could barely see 5 feet in front of her. She felt her way more than she saw it, her hand on the guide rope her father had strung between the two buildings. Inside, she moved quickly. Clean bandages, her father's whiskey for cleaning the wound, and the small wooden box of herbs and tinctures he'd taught her how to use. Yarrow to stop bleeding, comfrey to knit the flesh. When she returned to the barn, Daniel Hayes was exactly where she'd left him. His hand was pressed to his side, but his other hand was resting near the butt of his holstered gun. His eyes, she noticed now in the clear lantern light, were a startling gray-blue. They were watchful, but not threatening. "I'll need to clean it," she said, kneeling beside him. "This will burn." He just nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't even flinch when she poured the whiskey over the raw gash. He just watched her, his gaze intense and unreadable. Sarah worked in silence, her fingers moving with practiced skill. She applied a poultice of the herbs, the familiar earthy scent filling the small space around them. Then she wrapped his torso with the clean bandages, her movements efficient and impersonal. "You know your way around healing," he observed, his voice a low rumble. "My father was a doctor," she said, tying off the bandage, "a Union Army surgeon, during the war." Something flickered in his eyes at that. A ghost of a memory, maybe, but all he said was, "Fine man, then." He was. She gathered her supplies, standing up. "You can stay here tonight. There's plenty of hay. The animals will keep it warm enough." She hesitated. "I'll bring you some food once I've settled things in the cabin." "Much obliged, Miss Calloway." She paused at the barn door, the howling wind waiting for her just outside. She looked back at him. He sat with his back straight, despite the new bandage and the pain she knew he must be in. His hat rested on his knee, and his dark hair fell across his forehead. He didn't look like a common drifter. His clothes were trail-worn, but they were made of good material, and he spoke like an educated man. "Why are you out here, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Not many travel this way, especially not with a storm like this coming." He looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Heading to Fort Benton," he said. "I'm a carpenter by trade these days. Heard they're building new structures at the fort." A carpenter. It didn't feel right. A man who could handle a gun like that, who could face down a charging wolf without blinking. A carpenter? She just nodded, not sure if she believed him, not sure it mattered. "I'll be back with food," she said, and slipped out into the storm, closing the heavy door behind her. As she fought her way back to the cabin, a single unsettling thought burrowed into her mind. A carpenter wouldn't carry a Colt Peacemaker that looked that well used, and he certainly wouldn't know the name of the herb she'd used on his wound. He had called it yarrow. Most men would have just called it a weed. Whoever Daniel Hayes was, he wasn't telling her the whole truth, and that made him dangerous. From her kitchen window, the barn was just a dark shape swallowed by the swirling blizzard. The wind howled like a hungry animal, clawing at the corners of her small, sturdy cabin. Sarah stirred a pot of rabbit stew, the smell of thyme and simmering meat filling the warm room. It had been 5 years. 5 years since she'd fled Boston, fled the life of a school teacher, fled the whispers and the pitying looks. 5 years since William Thornton. She touched her back absently, the gesture unconscious. Even through her thick wool dress, she could feel the ridge of scar tissue. The banker's son, with his fine clothes and even finer words, had taught her a brutal lesson about trust, a lesson that had left scars both on her skin and on her soul. Her father had saved her. Joseph Calloway, the battlefield surgeon, had seen the wound in his daughter's spirit and had done what he did best. He'd cut away the diseased part of her life. He'd whisked her away from the scandal and the shame, bringing her here to the vast, unforgiving emptiness of Montana. A place to heal, he'd called it, a place where the past couldn't find you. He'd been right in a way. The work had strengthened her body. The solitude had hardened her spirit. But some wounds never truly heal. They just scar over. She ladled the stew onto a tin plate, cut a thick slice of bread, and wrapped it all in a cloth. She pulled on her heavy coat and stepped back out into the fury of the storm. As she pushed her way toward the barn, she wondered what kind of wounds her unexpected guest was carrying. A man like Daniel Hayes didn't get to his age without collecting a few scars of his own. He ate like a man who was savoring every bite, not like someone who was starved. There was a deliberation to his movements, a control that seemed to be a part of his very nature. "This is fine stew, Miss Calloway," he said, using a piece of bread to sop up the last of the gravy. "My compliments." Sarah sat on an overturned bucket a few feet away, her rifle leaning against the wall within arm's reach. She watched him, trying to piece together the puzzle he presented. "Where were you before heading to Fort Benton?" she asked. "Helena, most recently. Before that, Wyoming Territory. You move around a lot." He nodded, setting the empty plate aside. "Never found a reason to stay in one place for too long. And what did you do before you were a carpenter?" She pressed, her voice sharp. His steady, unreadable eyes met hers. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I was a scout. During the war. Union side." A scout? That made more sense than a carpenter. It fit the gun, the watchfulness, the way he seemed to read the land. But it didn't explain everything. "So you worked with the Army?" she asked. "For a time? My father was a surgeon, you know. He saved a lot of lives." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am. You mentioned that." He paused. "Army surgeons were the best kind of men." "You recognize the herbs I used on your wound?" she stated, not making it a question. "The yarrow. Most men wouldn't know its name, let alone that it stops bleeding." He didn't miss a beat. "I picked up bits of knowledge here and there. Useful things when you live the way I do." It was an answer, but it wasn't the truth. Not the whole truth. She could feel it. Every instinct she had honed over 5 years of solitude was screaming at her. She stood up, taking his plate. "Get some rest, Mr. Hayes. I'll check your wound in the morning. If the storm breaks, you can be on your way." "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Calloway." She paused at the door, her hand on the heavy wooden latch. "It isn't hospitality. It's human decency. I wouldn't leave anyone to freeze, not even a stranger." His mouth curved into a slight, sad smile. Even so, not everyone would do the same. Sarah didn't reply. She just slipped back out into the howling white, the roar of the wind swallowing the sound of the closing door. Back in the warmth of her cabin, she checked the locks on her door and the shutter on her window. She banked the fire and laid her rifle on the small table next to her bed. She told herself it was just a precaution, that the man in her barn was just a traveler, a stranger who had saved her life and would be gone by morning. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had let the wolf into the fold. Daniel Hayes was a lie wrapped in a mystery, and she had a terrible feeling that the storm he'd brought with him was far more dangerous than the one made of wind and snow. And in his haste to get out of his coat earlier, he had left his saddlebags near the door of the barn. She'd seen them tucked away in the corner. Tomorrow before he woke, she was going to find out what secrets Mr. Daniel Hayes was hiding. The storm raged for 3 full days. For 3 days, the world was nothing but a swirling vortex of white. For 3 days, Sarah was trapped. Her world shrunk to the cabin, the barn, and the guide rope that connected them. Twice a day, she made the perilous journey to bring Daniel Hayes food and to check his wound. He was an undemanding guest, quiet, respectful, and surprisingly helpful. He never complained about the cold or his injury. His wound was healing cleanly, a testament to her father's teachings. Each time she entered the barn, she found him either sitting quietly, whittling a piece of scrap wood with a small, sharp knife, or tending to her animals as if they were his own. He seemed to have a natural way with them. The sheep, usually skittish around strangers, would gather near him. Even Blue, her ever-watchful protector, seemed to have accepted his presence, often lying near the hay where Daniel slept. It was unnerving. Animals were supposed to be good judges of character, but Sarah's own judgment was screaming that something was wrong. His stories didn't add up. He was a carpenter who knew medicine, a scout who spoke like a professor. He claimed to be a drifter, yet his hands, though calloused, had a delicacy to them when he whittled, a sureness that spoke of a different kind of skill. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah woke to a profound silence. The howling wind was gone. She dressed quickly and headed for the barn. The world outside was a stunning, blinding landscape of white under a brilliant blue sky. She found Daniel already awake, mending a broken latch on one of the stalls. He was using his own tools, which he'd unpacked from his saddlebags. "You shouldn't be working," she said, her voice sharp. "You'll reopen that wound." He straightened up, setting a small hammer aside. "Good morning to you, too, Miss Calloway. Just making myself useful." He smiled, a genuine expression that actually reached his eyes for the first time. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less haunted. "Besides, I believe the trail to Fort Benton should be passable by midday." A shadow seemed to cross his face as he said it, a reluctance. Or maybe she was just imagining things. "Do you have family waiting for you?" she asked, busying herself by filling the water trough. "No family," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Something in his voice made her look up. He was staring out the small barn window at the pristine, sun-drenched snow. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to be on his shoulders. "I lost my father last winter," she heard herself say, the words a crack in her own armor. "He's buried on the hill behind the cabin." He turned to her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry for your loss." They worked in a companionable silence after that. The easy quiet between them felt more dangerous than any argument. It was a silence that could be mistaken for comfort, for trust. As midday approached, Sarah knew she couldn't put it off any longer. Her chance to look through his things while he was working had been spoiled by his constant quiet helpfulness. It was now or never. "I'll go prepare a final meal," she said, "to see you on your way." "You've been more than kind, Miss Calloway." She just nodded and left the barn. But she didn't go to the cabin. Instead, she circled around to the back, to the small, grimy window of the tack room where he'd neatly stored his saddlebags. Her heart was pounding. This was a violation, a betrayal of the very decency she'd claimed to be showing him. But she had to know. The window was stuck fast with ice and grime. She used the tip of her knife to pry it open, the sound of scraping wood loud in the still air. She hoisted herself up and squeezed through the small opening, landing silently on the dusty floor inside. His saddlebags were there, leaning against the wall. They were made of worn leather, heavy and full. Her hands trembled as she unbuckled the first strap. Inside, she found what she expected: a change of clothes, a shaving kit, a small leather-bound book that looked like a journal. She was about to close it, feeling a flush of shame, when her fingers brushed against something hard and cold wrapped in an oilcloth at the very bottom. She pulled it out. It was a pistol, not the Colt he wore on his hip, but a smaller, more elegant Derringer. Tucked beside it was a folded piece of paper, a wanted poster. Her blood ran cold. She unfolded it with shaking hands. The sketch was crude, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same strong jaw, the same dark hair, the same watchful eyes. The name printed at the bottom was Daniel Hayes, and the reward was for $500 for robbery and murder. She dropped the poster as if it had burned her. She stumbled back from the saddlebags, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A murderer. She had sheltered a murderer in her barn for 3 days. She had fed him, tended his wounds, talked with him, laughed with him. She scrambled back toward the window, her only thought to get to her rifle in the cabin. She had to get away. She had to protect herself. Her hand was on the window frame when she heard his voice right outside the tack room door. "Sarah, are you all right? I heard a noise." She froze, trapped. The tack room door swung open and Daniel Hayes stood there, his silhouette blocking the light. His expression was one of mild concern. Then his eyes fell on the wanted poster lying on the floor. The concern vanished. His face became a cold, hard mask. He took a step inside, closing the door behind him. The small room was suddenly dark, confining. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've been looking through my things." The world seemed to shrink to the four walls of the dusty tack room. Sarah's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Trapped. She was trapped with a killer. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape. A pitchfork leaned against the wall. Too far. The window behind her. Too slow. Daniel Hayes took another slow step into the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wanted poster on the floor. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice low and strained. "Isn't it?" She shot back, her own voice tight with fear and fury. "Wanted for robbery, for murder. Is that why you're so good with a gun, Mr. Hayes? Is that what a scout does?" He finally looked up, and the look in his eyes wasn't what she expected. It wasn't anger or menace. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness. "The robbery part is true enough," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "But I never murdered anyone. A jury in Wyoming seems to think differently. A jury that was bought and paid for by the man I robbed," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "A man who deserved to be robbed. A man who left dozens of families to starve after his bank collapsed." He took another step, and she flinched back against the wall. "Stay away from me." He stopped, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "Sarah, I'm not going to hurt you. If I was going to harm you, I've had 3 days to do it." His logic was sound, but her fear was a wild animal, clawing at her insides. "How can I believe you? You're a liar. You lied about being a carpenter. You lied about everything." "I lied to protect myself," he said, "and maybe to protect you too." He knelt down, not taking his eyes off her, and picked up the wanted poster. He folded it carefully and tucked it inside his coat. Then he reached into the saddlebag again. "You missed something," he said. He pulled out another object wrapped in cloth. This one was heavier, round. He unwrapped it slowly. It was a pocket watch. Tarnished silver, finely made. He held it out to her on the palm of his hand. "This is the real reason I'm here," he said. Sarah stared at the watch, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It was old, intricately carved, and familiar, terribly familiar. With a trembling hand, she reached out and took it. She turned it over. The inscription on the back made her blood freeze and her vision swim. "To Joseph Calloway, for service above and beyond. 1865, her father's watch. The one he'd been given by his commanding officer after the war. The one that had been buried with him. You," she whispered, the horror of it choking her. "You robbed his grave." Daniel's face contorted in a flash of pain. "No, God, no, Sarah. I would never." "Then how?" she demanded, her voice rising to a near scream. "How do you have this?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed bottomless. "Because he gave it to me," he said softly, "just before he died." That was impossible. Her father had died here, in this cabin, in her arms. This man had been hundreds of miles away. "You're lying," she hissed. "My father is dead. He died months ago." "I know," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "But before he died, he made sure I would find you. He sent me a letter, and he sent me this." He gestured to the watch in her hand. As proof, he reached into an inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a worn, folded envelope. Her father's precise, familiar handwriting was on the front. It was addressed to D. Hayes, General Delivery, Helena, Montana Territory. He held it out to her. "He asked one last favor of me," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "He asked me to find his daughter. He said she needed to know the truth, a truth he could never bring himself to tell her." Sarah stared at the letter, then at the watch, then at the face of the man standing before her. A wanted man, a man her father had trusted with his final message. Nothing made sense. Her entire world, the solid ground she had built for herself over 5 years of hardship, was fracturing beneath her feet. "What truth?" she whispered, the words barely audible. "What promise?" The sound of the barn door creaking open made them both freeze. Blue started barking from outside. "Hello? Miss Calloway?" A man's voice called out, a voice she recognized with a sinking feeling of dread. Harold Blackwood, the banker from town who wanted her land. Daniel moved instantly. He grabbed her arm, his touch firm but not rough, and pulled her deeper into the shadows of the tack room. "Not a word," he whispered, his face inches from hers. His eyes weren't weary anymore. They were sharp, alert, and dangerous. "Your life might depend on it." Harold Blackwood's voice was like oil, slick and overly smooth. "Miss Calloway, I know you're in there. The storm has passed, and I've come to discuss my offer again." In the dim light of the tack room, Daniel held a finger to his lips. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, pressing his ear to the crack in the door. Sarah stood frozen, her father's watch clutched in one hand, the letter in the other. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. A murderer in her barn. A message from her dead father. And now the one man she truly distrusted was on her doorstep. "Perhaps she's in the cabin," another voice said. Sarah recognized it as Dr. Collins, the town's only other physician, a man her father had never liked. "Check," Blackwood commanded. Sarah could hear footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Daniel's eyes met hers in the darkness. He held up 2 fingers, then pointed toward the main barn area. 2 men. He drew his Colt, the sound of the hammer being cocked back unnervingly loud in the small space. He gestured for her to stay put, then slipped through the door, melting into the shadows of the barn like a ghost. Sarah's heart was hammering. What was she supposed to do? Stay here? Run? Blackwood wanted her land. Daniel was wanted for murder. Was one a lesser threat than the other? She crept to the door and peered through the crack. Blackwood was standing in the center of the barn, looking around with a sneer of distaste. "Hardly a fitting home for a lady of your breeding, Miss Calloway." "She seems to manage," Daniel's voice said, seemingly coming from nowhere. Blackwood spun around, his hand instinctively going to the pistol on his own hip. "Hayes, what the devil are you doing here?" So they knew each other. The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened. Daniel stepped out from behind a stack of hay bales, his own gun held loosely at his side, but pointed at the floor. "Miss Calloway was kind enough to offer me shelter from the storm." "Shelter?" Blackwood laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "I heard you were asking questions about me and Helena, that you were looking for this property specifically." Daniel didn't deny it. "A man has to have a destination." "Indeed, and yours seems to be the end of a rope." Blackwood's eyes were cold and hard. "I wonder if the local marshal knows there's a $500 reward for your head. I wonder if your investors know you're trying to buy this land for a fraction of what it's really worth," Daniel countered smoothly. Blackwood's smile faltered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? All that talk about a railroad spur. It's a lie. There's no railroad coming through this valley. But there is something else here, isn't there, Blackwood? Something Joseph Calloway discovered. Something you want so badly you're willing to cheat a grieving woman to get it." From her hiding spot, Sarah's mind reeled. A lie? Her father had discovered something? Just then, Dr. Collins appeared at the barn door. "She's not in the cabin. The door's barred from the inside." He stopped short when he saw Daniel. "Hayes, you!" "Hello, doctor," Daniel said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Still peddling snake oil and bad advice?" "Harold, this changes things," Collins said nervously, his eyes darting between Daniel and Blackwood. It changes nothing, Blackwood snapped. He turned his full attention back to Daniel. You're a complication, Hayes, a loose end. And I don't like loose ends. He started to raise his pistol, but Daniel was faster, so much faster. His Colt was up and aimed before Blackwood's had even cleared its holster. I wouldn't, Daniel said, his voice flat and deadly. The barn was silent except for the nervous bleating of the sheep. It was a standoff, and Sarah was still holding the letter from her dead father, a letter that promised a truth. Maybe a truth that was worth killing for. She had to make a choice. Trust the wanted man who claimed to have a message from her father, or trust the respectable banker who was clearly a liar and a cheat. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the tack room, her father's rifle held firmly in her hands. Get off my land, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. 3 guns were now in play. Blackwood and Dr. Collins both turned to stare at her, their surprise evident. Blackwood's eyes flickered from her face to the rifle she held, then back again. A slow, ugly smile spread across his lips. Well, well, the little bird shows her talons. He looked from Sarah to Daniel, then back again. It seems I've stumbled into a cozy little arrangement here. I wonder what the good people of the town would think, Miss Calloway. A respectable school teacher, shacked up with a wanted killer. The insinuation was a physical blow. Sarah felt a hot flush of anger rise in her cheeks. He saved my life, which is more than I can say for you. Did he now? Blackwood's gaze was speculative. Or did he just get rid of the competition? What are you talking about? The wolves, he said smoothly. Convenient, wasn't it, that they should attack just as he was passing by, almost as if they were encouraged. The suggestion was monstrous. Could Daniel have somehow orchestrated the attack? To what end? To get close to her? To gain her trust? She glanced at Daniel. His face was unreadable, his attention fixed on Blackwood. You're a snake, Blackwood, Daniel said, his voice low. And you're a dead man, Blackwood retorted. Maybe not today, but soon. The law has a long reach. He slowly holstered his pistol, a clear sign he was backing down for now. My offer for the land still stands, Miss Calloway. For now. But my patience is wearing thin. He gave her one last lingering look, then turned to Dr. Collins. Let's go, Edwin. We've seen all we need to see here. The 2 men backed out of the barn, their eyes never leaving Daniel. They mounted their horses and rode off, their dark shapes disappearing against the bright snow. The silence they left behind was heavy and suffocating. Sarah kept her rifle raised, pointed at Daniel. He slowly, deliberately uncocked his pistol and holstered it. You knew him, she said. It wasn't a question. I know of him, Daniel corrected. I know he's a vulture who preys on people's misfortune. Your father wrote about him in his letters. Letters? Plural? Daniel nodded. We corresponded for years, after the war. Her mind was spinning. Her father, a man who had cherished his privacy, had been writing to this fugitive for years. The wanted poster, she said, her voice hard. Tell me about it. He didn't hesitate. The man I robbed was named Marcus Thorne. He owned a bank in Laramie. He speculated with his depositors' money, ranchers, farmers, good people. When his investments went bad, he took what was left and was going to flee. I took it back. I gave it back to the people he'd stolen from. And the murder? Thorne's deputy, a hired thug. He tried to stop me. He drew on me. I was faster. It was a fair fight. But Thorne owned the judge and the sheriff, so they called it murder. It was a good story, a noble story. But was it true? And my father knew all this? He knew, Daniel confirmed. He knew the kind of man I am. He looked at her, his expression earnest. And he knew the kind of man Blackwood is. That's why he sent me. He gestured to the letter still clutched in her hand. The truth is in there, Sarah. All of it, if you're willing to read it. She looked down at the envelope. Her father's handwriting seemed to mock her. The man she thought she knew, the quiet, gentle doctor, had been living a life of secrets. Secrets he had entrusted to a wanted man. She slowly lowered the rifle. All right, Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of it all. Let's go to the cabin. You can tell me everything. You can tell me what kind of truth makes a man like my father trust a man like you." The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the small warm cabin. Outside, the world was silent and white. Sarah sat at the small plank table, her father's pocket watch resting in front of her. Daniel Hayes sat opposite, a tin cup of coffee held in his hands. He hadn't told the story yet. He was waiting for her to read the letter first. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal. The paper was old, the ink faded. The date at the top was from a week before her father died. December 10th, 1882. My dear Hayes, if you are reading this, I did not survive the winter as I had hoped. I ask one final favor of a man to whom I already owe so much. Find my daughter. Sarah needs to know the truth that I could never bring myself to tell her. The enclosed map will lead you to our homestead in Montana Territory. The watch is yours now, as it should have been years ago. I only kept it to remember our promise. With eternal gratitude, Joseph Calloway. Sarah read it twice, then a third time. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of secrets, a promise, a truth. She looked up at Daniel. He saved my life at Gettysburg, Daniel said, as if reading her mind. Not just me, dozens of us. He was the finest surgeon I ever knew, and a better man than most. You said you were a scout. I was, Daniel said. He took a deep breath. But before that, before the war, broke something inside me. I was a doctor, a surgeon, like your father. Sarah stared at him, stunned. Another lie, another truth hidden beneath the surface. A doctor. It explained everything. His hands, his knowledge of her herbs, the way he'd assessed her own wound from the wolf. Your father and I met at Antietam, he said, his eyes distant, lost in a memory she couldn't imagine. The bloodiest day of the war. We worked side by side for 36 hours straight. We were brothers in blood and bone. After that, we served together whenever we could. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. He spoke of you often. His daughter back in Boston. He couldn't wait for the war to end, to get back to you. But he didn't, Sarah said softly. Not right away. No, Daniel agreed. Gettysburg changed him. It changed us both. He described the 3 days of battle, the endless flood of wounded men, the impossible choices they had to make. On the third day, a young Confederate boy was brought in, barely 16, a bullet in his chest. Most surgeons would have left him to die. But not Joseph, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. He refused to give up. He worked on that boy for hours, and against all odds, the boy lived. Sarah could picture it, her father's fierce determination, his refusal to surrender to death. That night, Daniel continued, I found your father weeping. He told me he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't keep putting men back together just so they could be sent out to be broken again. He said he was going to find a place far away from war, a place where healing could be pure again. So he came here, Sarah whispered. Daniel nodded. And I tried to go back to my practice in Philadelphia, but I couldn't. Every time I held a scalpel, I saw the faces of the boys we couldn't save. He looked at her, his eyes filled with an old pain. So I left medicine. I became a scout, a drifter, a carpenter, anything to stop being a doctor. Sarah looked down at the watch. The inscription. Why did he want you to have it? Daniel hesitated. There's more to the story, Sarah. The part he couldn't bring himself to tell you. The part he sent me to explain. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Did he ever tell you why he chose this specific piece of land? He said it called to him. He said it was a special place. It is, Daniel said, his gaze intense. More special than you know. He sought it out after years of research, corresponding with native healers. This land, the plants that grow here, they have healing properties found almost nowhere else on Earth. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place. Blackwood, Dr. Collins. Their obsession with her land wasn't about a railroad. It was about her father's research. And that, Daniel said softly, is connected to the final truth. The truth about you. He reached into his saddlebag, which he'd brought in from the tack room. He pulled out the small leather-bound journal she had seen earlier. He gave me this years ago for safekeeping, Daniel said, handing it to her. It's the first half of his journal. He wanted you to read it. He said it would explain everything. Her hands trembled as she took the book. Her father's journal, a private history she had never been allowed to see. She opened it to the last entry, the one he must have marked for her. The handwriting was shaky, but still recognizably his. The entry was dated July 4th, 1863. Gettysburg. I have written to Hayes about the girl. He of all people will understand why I must bring her here, to this land. He was there. He was there that day. He helped me bring her into this world even as her mother left it. A Cherokee woman wounded by a stray bullet while fleeing the fighting. In labor too early. We could not save her. But the child, so tiny, yet so strong, she survived. No one claimed her. No one wanted her. But I did. From the moment I held her, I knew she was meant to be mine. I named her Sarah, after my own mother, and sent her to my sister in Boston with a story about her being my child from a brief marriage. A lie told with love, but a lie nonetheless. Sarah stared at the words, but they wouldn't make sense. The room was tilting, the sound of the fire fading to a dull roar in her ears. She looked up at Daniel, her eyes wide with disbelief. I'm not his daughter, she whispered. I'm not a Calloway at all. Daniel's face was filled with a deep, aching compassion. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and steady. You are his daughter in every way that matters, Sarah, he said, his voice a gentle anchor in her spinning world. He chose you. He loved you. He dedicated his life to you. But his words were just sounds. The foundation of her entire identity had been pulverized. Joseph Calloway, the man whose blood she thought she shared, was not her father. Her entire life, her name, her history, it was all a lie. A lie told with love, perhaps, but a lie. She snatched her hand back from Daniel's, a sudden hot rage surging through her. Why? She demanded, her voice shaking. Why would he do this? Why would he lie to me for my entire life? To protect you, Daniel said quietly. Protect me from what? From the truth? From a world that, in 1863, would not have been kind to a half-Cherokee orphan? He said, his words blunt but true. He gave you his name. He gave you a life of privilege and education. He did it out of love. The anger began to recede, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. Her mother, a Cherokee woman, a faceless stranger who had died giving birth to her on a battlefield. My gift, she whispered, her mind racing. My ability with herbs, with healing. I always thought he taught me everything. He taught you the science, Daniel said, but he believed the gift itself was in your blood. It was your heritage. Your mother, Nanyehi, was a healer, a medicine woman from a long line of healers. Nanyehi. The name was foreign, yet it resonated somewhere deep inside her. With her dying breath, Daniel continued, his voice soft, she made your father promise. She told him her child would have the gift. She made him swear he would raise you in a place of power, a place where you could learn to bridge the two worlds of medicine, the white man's science and the Cherokee way. Sarah looked around the small cabin, at the shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, at the medical texts stacked on the mantelpiece. This cabin, this land. It wasn't just a refuge from her past in Boston. It was a cradle, designed by her father to nurture a part of her she never even knew existed. So this land, he chose it for you, Daniel confirmed, to honor his promise to your mother. She stood up, needing to move, to breathe. She paced the small cabin like a caged animal. Every memory of her father was now cast in a new light. The way he watched her when she worked in the herb garden, the pride in his eyes when she set a bone or diagnosed a fever. It hadn't just been a father's pride. It had been something more, a scientist watching his grandest experiment unfold. Why didn't he tell me? She asked, whirling to face Daniel. Why send you, a stranger, a fugitive, to tell me after he's gone? I think he was afraid, Daniel said honestly. Afraid you would hate him for the lie. Afraid you would leave. So he took the coward's way out. He left the burden to me. The simple, unvarnished truth of that statement seemed to calm the storm inside her. He wasn't defending Joseph. He was just explaining him. So, she said, her voice flat, what now? Now, Daniel said, standing up, We protect his legacy. Your legacy. Blackwood knows this land is valuable. He doesn't know why, not exactly, but Dr. Collins must have seen enough of your father's work to suspect. They think you're just a woman alone, that you don't know the value of what you're sitting on. He was right. This changed everything. This wasn't just her home anymore. It was a legacy, a sacred trust. The second half of his journal, she said suddenly, it must be here, in the cabin. It would have the rest of his research. We need to find it, Daniel agreed, before Blackwood finds a way to take it. They began to search. The cabin was small, but her father had been a man of hidden compartments and clever solutions. They checked under loose floorboards, behind the stone fireplace, in the hollowed-out books on his shelf. Finally, tucked away in the back of a chest filled with his old Army medical equipment, they found it. Another leather-bound journal, identical to the first. Sarah opened it, her hands no longer shaking. A strange sense of purpose was settling over her. She was no longer just Sarah Calloway, the abandoned schoolteacher. She was the daughter of Joseph Calloway, the brilliant surgeon, and she was the daughter of Nanyehi, the Cherokee healer, and she was the guardian of this land. She flipped through the pages, her father's neat script detailing years of experiments, of successes, of failures. Then, an entry from just a year ago caught her eye. January 22nd, 1882. Blackwood came again today. His offer is higher. His interest seems focused on the North Field, where the rarest specimens grow. How does he know? Collins must be his informant. I must be more careful. The land is not for sale. It is Sarah's birthright. Then a final entry, dated the day before he died. The handwriting was almost a scrawl. No word from Hayes. I pray he gets my letter. Sarah must be protected. My brave, brilliant girl. Cherokee blood runs strong in her. I should have told her. I hope she can forgive me. I leave her this land, this knowledge, and my eternal love. May she use them all wisely. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of confusion or rage. They were tears of love, of loss, and of a fierce, burning resolve. The North Field, she said, looking up at Daniel. That's where the most valuable plants are. We have to see what's there. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. We should go now, before Blackwood makes his next move. As they pulled on their coats, Sarah paused. She looked at Daniel, the wanted man who had upended her world, and in doing so, had given her back a part of herself she never knew she'd lost. Thank you, she said. He just met her gaze, his gray-blue eyes steady and sure. The thanks can wait, he said. Right now we have work to do. The North Field was a place her father had always called sacred. He never let the sheep graze there. He never tilled the soil. He had told her it was a place where the wild things of the land needed to be left in peace. Now she understood the real reason. As she and Daniel trudged through the knee-deep snow, the sun glaring off the endless white, Sarah felt a sense of trespass, even though this was her own land. This was the heart of her father's work, the heart of her mother's legacy. They crested a small rise, and the field lay before them. It looked like any other part of the property, a rolling expanse of white, dotted with the dark skeletons of winter weeds. But something was wrong. We're not alone, Daniel said, his voice low. He pointed. There, in the pristine snow, were tracks. A man's boots and a horse. They weren't fresh, but they were from after the storm. Someone had been here. They followed the tracks, their own boots sinking into the deep prints left behind. The tracks led them to the center of the field, where the snow was disturbed, churned up in a wide circle. Someone had been digging. Blackwood, Sarah breathed, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Daniel knelt, examining the shallow hole. The ground is frozen solid. They couldn't get very deep, but they knew exactly where to look. Sarah looked around. How could they know? This one spot in the middle of a 10-acre field? My father must have mapped it, she said, thinking aloud. In his journals, if Collins saw those maps, he'd know where the most potent specimens are planted. Daniel finished, his face grim. They'll be back, with better tools. They had to find what Blackwood was looking for. They had to get to it first. As they turned to leave, Sarah's foot hit something hard beneath the snow. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell. What was that? She knelt down, brushing the snow away. Her gloved fingers found the cold, hard edge of something metal. Daniel, look. Together they dug frantically, the cold snow biting at their hands. They unearthed a small, rusted metal box, about the size of a cigar box. It was old, but it hadn't been lost. It had been deliberately buried. The latch was stiff, but it wasn't locked. With a grunt of effort, Daniel pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried moss, were three things. The first was a stack of yellowed papers wrapped in oilcloth. Sarah carefully unfolded the top sheet. It was a letter, but the handwriting wasn't her father's. It was a flowing, elegant script. To Joseph Calloway, my friend, it began. I entrust to you the secret of the medicine cave. Protect it. Let it be used only for healing, never for greed. The spirits of my ancestors will watch over you. It was signed Running Elk, medicine man of the Eastern Cherokee. A medicine cave. Sarah's eyes widened. Beneath the letters was a small leather pouch. She opened it. Inside, on a simple silver chain, was a pendant. It was a circular design of flowing, intertwined lines like water. It felt cool and smooth in her palm. It's beautiful, she whispered. Cherokee craftsmanship, Daniel said softly. It must have been your mother's. Sarah clutched the pendant, a tangible link to the woman she had never known. But it was the third item in the box that made her blood run cold. It was another wanted poster. But this one didn't have Daniel's face on it. It had a different sketch, a different name. Wanted, Harold Blackwood. For fraud, embezzlement, and suspicion of murder. Last seen near Denver, Colorado. The poster was dated 2 years ago. Blackwood wasn't just a greedy banker. He was a fugitive. A dangerous criminal, hiding in plain sight, building a new life on the ashes of his old one. And he was willing to do anything to protect his secrets. Including, Sarah now realized with chilling certainty, murder. My God, she breathed, staring at the poster. He's a fraud. A killer. Daniel took the poster from her, his expression hardening into granite. This explains everything. His desperation. His willingness to threaten you. He's not just trying to get rich. He's trying to build a fortress. Enough money, enough power, and his past stays buried. A sudden, terrible thought struck Sarah. My father. His illness came on so suddenly. He was strong, healthy, and then he just faded. She looked at Daniel, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Dr. Collins was treating him. Collins is Blackwood's cousin. What if it wasn't an illness? What if her father had been murdered, poisoned, slowly and methodically, by the man he had trusted with his care? The possibility was a black, venomous thing coiling in her gut. Blackwood hadn't just wanted the land. He had wanted the man who knew its secrets out of the way, permanently. We have to get back to the cabin, Daniel said, his voice urgent. Now. If they know we're out here. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They were exposed, vulnerable. They scrambled back through the snow, their minds racing. The game had changed. This wasn't a legal dispute over property anymore. This was a fight for survival against a man who had already killed to protect his lies. As they crested the last hill before the cabin, they both saw it at the same time. Smoke, not the gentle white plume from her own chimney. This was thick, black, angry smoke, billowing up into the clear blue sky, from the direction of her barn. No, Sarah whispered, breaking into a run. No! They raced down the hill, stumbling and sliding in the deep snow. The smell of burning hay and wood filled the air. As they got closer, they could see the flames, orange and red, licking up the side of the barn, devouring the dry, aged wood. And standing there, watching it burn, were two men, Blackwood and Dr. Collins. It's a shame, Blackwood called out to them, his voice carrying easily in the still air. He had a lit torch in his hand. These old buildings, they go up so fast, a stray spark from a lantern, perhaps. The sheep were bleating in terror inside, their panicked cries a heartbreaking chorus. And Blue. Where was Blue? You monster, Sarah screamed, her voice raw. Just a businessman, Miss Calloway. Blackwood said with a cold smile. Clearing the way for progress and removing complications. He looked pointedly at Daniel. Dr. Collins looked pale and shaken. Harold, we should go. This is too much. It's never too much when it comes to securing one's future, Edwin. Blackwood tossed the torch onto the snow. Your cabin is next. I suggest you take my offer. It's the last one you'll get. But Daniel wasn't looking at Blackwood. He was looking past him, at something near the burning barn door, a small black and white shape, lying still in the snow. Blue! Sarah choked out, her legs threatening to give out from under her. Rage, cold and pure, surged through Daniel. He didn't say a word. He just drew his pistol and started walking toward them, his steps slow and deliberate. That was a mistake, he said, his voice a low, deadly growl. Blackwood laughed and drew his own weapon. You in what army, Hayes? And then, from the trees behind Blackwood and Collins, a third figure emerged. He was a tall, elderly Native American man, wrapped in furs. His long gray hair was in two braids, and his face was a roadmap of wrinkles. In his hands he held an old but well cared for Winchester rifle. He leveled the rifle at Blackwood. The army of the man whose land you are burning, the old man said, his voice deep and resonant. I am Thomas Running Elk, and you are trespassing on sacred ground. Blackwood and Collins spun around, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They were trapped between Daniel, advancing from the front, and the old man with the rifle behind them. Who in the hell are you? Blackwood snarled. I am the son of the man who entrusted this land's secrets to Joseph Calloway, Thomas said, his dark eyes burning with a cold fire. And I am a friend of his daughter. He looked at Sarah, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. Sisqua, he said, the Cherokee name for little bird falling from his lips like a forgotten memory. Your mother's people have not forgotten you. The world seemed to stop. Here, in the midst of fire and death and desperation, was another piece of her past, standing before her as solid as the mountains themselves. But there was no time for revelations. Dr. Collins, his nerve breaking completely, fumbled for his own pistol. We have to shoot our way out, he shrieked. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Daniel's gun barked once. Collins cried out and crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Blackwood, seeing his chance, pivoted and fired at Daniel. But Daniel was already moving, diving into the snow as the bullet hissed past his ear. Sarah reacted on pure instinct. She raised her own rifle, the one her father had taught her to use. She lined up the sights on Blackwood, the man who had cheated and threatened and burned her home, the man who had likely murdered her father. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but it was Thomas Running Elk who fired. The crack of the Winchester echoed across the valley. Blackwood stiffened, a look of profound surprise on his face. He looked down at the dark red stains spreading across his chest. Then his knees buckled, and he fell face first into the snow. Silence. The only sounds were the roar of the fire and the terrified cries of the sheep still trapped inside the burning barn. Sarah ran forward, not toward the fallen men, but toward the barn. The sheep! We have to get them out! Daniel was already on his feet, racing to the main doors. The latch will be red hot! Thomas Running Elk was there beside them, using the butt of his Winchester to smash the heavy wooden bar that held the doors closed. The wood splintered. Together, he and Daniel threw their weight against the doors, forcing them open against the heat and smoke. A wave of terrified, smoke-blinded sheep poured out, scattering across the snow. Sarah coughed, her eyes streaming from the acrid smoke, trying to count them, praying they were all out. Then Daniel emerged from the smoke, carrying something in his arms. It was Blue. Her loyal, brave dog was limp, his fur singed, a nasty gash on his head. But he was breathing, faintly, but breathing. Sarah took him, cradling him like a child, tears of relief and grief streaming down her face. She looked at the scene around her. The barn, her father's legacy, was a roaring inferno. Dr. Collins was groaning on the ground, his shoulder a bloody mess, and Harold Blackwood lay dead in the snow. And standing there, calm amidst the chaos, were the two men who had saved her. Daniel Hayes, the fugitive doctor, and Thomas Running Elk, the ghost from her mother's past. Her old life was gone, turned to ash and smoke. But for the first time, as she looked at the burning ruins and the bodies in the snow, she wasn't afraid. She was Siskwa. She was the daughter of Nanyehi. She was the guardian of this land, and her new life was just beginning. The fire burned itself out by nightfall, leaving behind the blackened, skeletal remains of the barn. The stars came out in a cold, indifferent sky. They had managed to save the sheep, and Blue, after having his head wound, cleaned, and stitched by Daniel, was weak but alive, resting by the hearth in the cabin. Dr. Collins was tied to a chair, his wound bandaged, his face a mask of pale, terrified sweat. Blackwood's body lay outside, covered by a tarp. The cabin was crowded, filled with the three unlikely allies who had survived the day. Thomas Running Elk sat by the fire, his ancient eyes seeming to hold the wisdom of generations. He had explained that his father had made a promise to Joseph Calloway, to watch over the land and the girl after he was gone. He had been living in the mountains nearby, observing, waiting for the right time to reveal himself. Blackwood's attack had forced his hand. "You knew my mother," Sarah said to him, her voice quiet. "Nanyehi was my cousin," Thomas said, his voice a low rumble. "She had the gift, strong, like you." He looked at the silver pendant Sarah now wore openly around her neck. "That was her mother's before her. It is good that it has come home." Daniel was cleaning his pistol at the table, his movements economical and precise. He had saved her life, again. He had faced down Blackwood without hesitation. He was a wanted man, but in Sarah's eyes he was more honorable than any respectable man she had ever known. "What do we do now?" she asked, looking from Daniel to Thomas. "The marshal will come. There will be questions." "We tell the truth," Daniel said simply, not looking up from his work, "or as much of it as they need to know. Blackwood and Collins attacked you. They burned your barn. We acted in self-defense." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "The wanted poster for Blackwood will help. As for mine, we'll deal with that when the time comes." The next day Daniel rode to town. He returned with the U.S. Marshal, a grim, weary man named Evans. They laid out the story. They showed him Blackwood's wanted poster. Dr. Collins, his spirit broken, confessed everything. Blackwood's fraudulent identity, the scheme to steal the land for its medicinal plants, the way he had deliberately given Joseph Calloway the wrong medicines, weakening him over months until his body finally gave out. Her father had been murdered. The confirmation was a cold, hard stone in Sarah's heart, but it was a stone of certainty, not despair. It fueled her resolve. Marshal Evans listened to the whole sordid tale. He looked at the ashes of the barn, at the dead fugitive, at the wounded doctor. He looked at Sarah, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes clear and strong. He looked at the quiet, imposing native man and the fugitive doctor who stood by her side. "Seems to me," the marshal said at last, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the snow, "that you've had a hell of a time, Miss Calloway, and that this territory is better off without Harold Blackwood in it." He looked at Daniel's wanted poster, which Daniel had handed him without a word. He studied it for a long moment, then slowly tore it into pieces. "Never did like the sheriff in Laramie," he said gruffly. "As far as I'm concerned, a man named Daniel Hayes died in that fire. The man standing here is just a carpenter, looking for work at Fort Benton." He turned to leave. "You'll have to come to Helena to give a formal statement, but I don't foresee any trouble. You folk did the law's job for it." And just like that, it was over. The threat was gone. Daniel Hayes was a free man. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm established itself on the homestead. With Thomas's guidance, Sarah began to learn about her heritage, about the Cherokee names for the plants, about the sacred traditions tied to the medicine cave. With Daniel's help, she began to document her father's research, combining his scientific methods with the ancient wisdom Thomas provided. They decided to rebuild the barn together. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the spring thaw turn the hills a tentative green, Daniel turned to her. "I should be on my way," he said quietly. "Fort Benton is still there. They still need carpenters." Sarah's heart clenched. After everything they had been through, was he really going to leave? "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, watching the sun dip below the mountains. For 15 years, he said, all I wanted was to keep moving. I was running from the ghost of the man I used to be. But here, with you, I haven't been running. I've been standing still. And it feels more like freedom than moving ever did. He turned to face her, his gray-blue eyes full of a warmth she had come to cherish. I'm not a doctor anymore, Sarah, and I'm not a scout. I'm just a man with a set of tools and a history full of ghosts. But if you'll have me, I'd like to build something here. With you. Sarah looked at her home, at the healing land that was her birthright. She looked at Thomas, sitting by the fire inside, a living link to her past. And she looked at Daniel, the man who had come into her life in a storm of violence and had brought her a world of truth and healing. She had lost a father, but she had found a family. I think, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, that we have a lot of building to do. He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. And as they sat there, watching the last light fade from the sky, Sarah Calloway knew that she was finally, truly home. The past had found her, not to destroy her, but to make her whole. If you enjoyed Sarah's story and believe in the power of truth and new beginnings, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you found that wanted poster?